They say sex is just pleasure, but what if it's never just about sex? What if it's actually a language of dominance, a coded ritual of the psyche where every tattoo becomes a confession inked on skin? Imagine standing across from someone whose body is a battlefield of unhealed wounds disguised as art. Are you reading rebellion or surrender? This isn't just physical intimacy, it's a war of symbols, a test of control, a mirror of hidden traumas no one dares to voice. Pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered why certain people are drawn to partners who make them feel small or devoured? Why some wear dragons, daggers, or broken clocks like armor? Maybe you're not just falling into a bed, you're falling into their unresolved story. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. What if every encounter is a subconscious power play, where one seeks to be seen and the other seeks to conquer? Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll never look at human connection or yourself the same way again. Sex is a subconscious battle for psychological control. Beneath the surface of pleasure, attraction, and passion lies an intricate dance of power, often invisible to the naked eye. It begins in silence. Unspoken rules, subtle shifts in body language, the way one partner initiates while the other yields. It's rarely about mutual connection. More often, it's about unexpressed needs seeking dominance or submission in a socially acceptable disguise. The bed becomes a stage, and each act of intimacy becomes a performance scripted by childhood wounds, unconscious desires, and the deeply buried hunger for control over one's own chaos. Control doesn't always look aggressive. It's not always about force or loud authority. Sometimes it's the quiet orchestration of the moment, the manipulation of mood, the withholding of emotion or touch to maintain the upper hand. The one who appears most vulnerable may in fact be pulling the psychological strings. In many relationships, the power dynamic during sex reflects the unspoken war being waged outside the bedroom. Who initiates, who leads, who surrenders, these choices speak volumes about internal hierarchies no one admits to. Many people use sex to feel powerful when they feel powerless elsewhere. The boss who feels emasculated by corporate pressure may seek sexual encounters to reclaim his authority. The woman who grew up unseen might use her sexuality not for affection, but as a weapon to be noticed, to dominate the attention she was once denied. In these situations, sex is no longer a shared experience. It becomes an arena of compensation. Each partner attempts to fix, fulfill, or force what they believe they lack within themselves. Often, people are unaware that they are reenacting deep-seated psychological patterns. A man drawn repeatedly to women who humiliate him may not be perverse. He may be revisiting the unresolved shame of childhood where love was conditional. A woman who only feels aroused when she's being emotionally controlled may unknowingly be seeking the same dynamic she had with a controlling parent. These stories play out in the subconscious, using sex as the ritual of repetition, where pain and pleasure blur. Every climax becomes a momentary escape, a false sense of victory over personal demons. Control in sex is also about who gets to define reality. The partner who controls the narrative, what is allowed, what is denied, what is labeled as love or lust, often holds invisible power. This form of psychological control is more dangerous because it's masked by charm, seduction, or emotional neediness. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It's the "I need you" that hides "I need to control how you see me." And in that moment, sex becomes less about desire and more about identity maintenance. The body becomes a pawn for emotional survival. The illusion of equality in intimacy is perhaps one of the greatest lies people tell themselves. Even when it appears mutual, there's often a silent score being kept. Who gave more? Who took more? Who needed it more? These invisible tallies create resentment, and that resentment seeks expression, sometimes through withdrawal, other times through intensified performance. This leads to a cycle where sex becomes both a relief and a weapon, a balm and a battleground. Every touch holds history. Every position hides a posture of dominance or submission that the conscious mind refuses to see. At its core, the psychological control embedded in sex reveals our deepest fear, being truly seen without armor. Control offers predictability. It allows individuals to script an outcome that feels safe. But intimacy, in its rawest form, threatens that. It demands surrender, emotional nakedness, and mutual recognition. For many, that is terrifying. So instead, they hide behind games, roles, and performances, using dominance, whether subtle or overt, to avoid the real confrontation with their own unhealed self. Even the desire to be dominated can be a form of control. By choosing to surrender, a person controls how and when they are overpowered. This illusion of choice masks dependency, and it is here the psychological complexity deepens. Pleasure becomes tied to powerlessness, which is then romanticized, repeated, and ritualized. The result is a cycle where emotional needs are never met, only manipulated. One partner may believe they're being adored, while the other is actually feeding on control, masked as affection. The most alarming truth is that many individuals cannot separate love from control. If a partner doesn't try to possess them, they feel unloved. If a partner doesn't chase or dominate, they feel undesirable. This creates dysfunctional expectations, where intensity is mistaken for intimacy and control is mislabeled as care. These distortions lead people into cycles of toxic relationships, always chasing the high of validation, never stopping to question if they are being seen or simply being used in someone else's psychological script. Sex, in this light, becomes the mirror. It reflects not who we pretend to be, but who we truly are when stripped of societal masks. The patterns that emerge during intimacy are not random, they are revelations. They point to unresolved conflicts, distorted self-images, and the roles people play to protect themselves from vulnerability. When viewed through this lens, every sexual act becomes a symbolic gesture in the larger story of the self, one that reveals far more about our psyche than most are prepared to admit. Dominance often masks emotional insecurity and fear of vulnerability. On the surface, it may appear as strength, confidence, or control, but beneath that exterior lies a fragile structure built on uncertainty, fear of exposure, and deep emotional wounds. People who exhibit dominant behavior, particularly in intimate or interpersonal relationships, often do so not out of genuine authority or inner power, but as a defense mechanism. They create walls instead of bridges, commands instead of conversations, and power plays instead of partnerships, not because they don't crave connection, but because connection feels dangerous. Vulnerability threatens to uncover the very parts of themselves they've worked so hard to hide. The fear of rejection, the trauma of past abandonment, the internal dialogue that says, "I am not enough unless I am in control." This facade of dominance can manifest in subtle ways. It may be the partner who always sets the terms of the relationship. It may be the friend who constantly offers advice but never asks for help. It could be the parent who micromanages out of love when in truth they are terrified of being seen as powerless or irrelevant. What looks like leadership is often an anxious need to regulate the external world because the internal world feels chaotic. Dominant individuals seek to control situations, people, or emotions, not because they enjoy power for power's sake, but because unpredictability triggers their hidden insecurity. In romantic relationships, dominance becomes a mask for those who fear emotional exposure. A man might insist on making every decision, not to oppress his partner, but to avoid the possibility of being blamed if something goes wrong. A woman might control her partner through emotional manipulation, not because she's heartless, but because she learned long ago that expressing need is unsafe. For such individuals, power becomes a substitute for safety. If they're in charge, they can't be betrayed. If they're emotionally distant, they can't be hurt. The tighter the grip, the more it reveals how afraid they are to be touched in the places that matter most. The paradox of dominance is that it often signals the absence of internal peace. Secure individuals don't need to control others because they trust themselves to navigate the unpredictable nature of life and love. But those operating from fear constantly seek leverage. They create hierarchies in relationships where love should be equal. They measure affection by obedience. They view surrender as weakness, not as trust. And in doing so, they miss the very essence of intimacy, which is mutual vulnerability. Many people who appear dominant have learned, often in childhood, that emotions are liabilities. Perhaps they grew up in environments where showing feelings led to ridicule, punishment, or neglect, so they armored up. They built personas that appeared tough, assertive, unshakable, but beneath that lies a wounded child who never felt safe to cry, to ask, or to be soft. That child still lives inside them, still shapes their adult relationships, still fears being abandoned the moment they let their guard down. So instead, they dominate, not knowing they're pushing people away to avoid the very pain they desperately want to heal from. Dominance becomes addictive. It offers immediate gratification, a sense of control, a false high of importance, a momentary escape from the fear of powerlessness. But it also isolates. It creates emotional deserts in relationships where richness and depth should exist. The dominant partner rarely receives authentic connection because people relate to the mask, not the person behind it. Over time, this leads to feelings of loneliness, emptiness, and confusion. They wonder why no one understands them, yet they never allow themselves to be understood. They long for love, yet sabotage it the moment it requires vulnerability. In professional settings, dominance may be rewarded, even admired, but even there, it can be a ticking time bomb. Leaders who dominate rather than inspire often create environments of fear rather than loyalty. They are surrounded by silence instead of honest feedback, compliance instead of innovation. Their emotional insecurity bleeds into their decision-making, leading to control-based strategies rather than trust-based leadership. The fear of being exposed as not enough drives them to overcompensate through authority, often at the cost of true influence. Dominance also affects how individuals perceive themselves. It creates a loop where self-worth is tied to control. The moment control is lost, whether through rejection, failure, or loss, their identity crumbles. This is why so many dominant individuals react explosively to perceived threats. Their anger isn't about the situation, it's about their terror that someone has seen the cracks in their armor. It's not the mistake that hurts them, it's the shame that follows. To maintain the illusion of strength, they double down on control, further burying the vulnerability they desperately need to confront. The tragedy is that dominance, when driven by fear, limits growth. It prevents the emotional intimacy that leads to healing. It blocks the humility required for learning. It starves the soul of true connection, replacing it with transactional relationships based on power dynamics. The dominant person may appear to have it all, yet often feels alone in a crowded room. They may be admired, but rarely truly loved. They may win arguments but lose relationships. They may command respect but never feel respected where it matters most, in their own hearts. And still, beneath it all, remains a deep longing. A longing to be seen without judgment. A longing to love without strategizing. A longing to rest in the presence of another without fearing betrayal or exposure. But that longing remains buried under layers of dominance, control, and emotional self-defense. Until that mask is removed, until the fear is faced, true connection remains just out of reach. Physical intimacy can be a reenactment of unhealed childhood dynamics. What we seek in the arms of another often mirrors the emotional patterns we were exposed to long before we understood what love really meant. Intimacy becomes less about connection and more about familiar scripts that play out unconsciously. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. A single touch can awaken buried needs, longings, and unresolved wounds that have never truly been acknowledged. Often, individuals confuse attraction with safety, chemistry with destiny, when in reality they are gravitating toward what feels emotionally recognizable, even if it hurt them in the past. Children raised in emotionally unstable environments often grow into adults who associate love with anxiety, neglect, or control. These early imprints don't vanish with age, they evolve and disguise themselves within adult relationships. For example, a child who had to earn affection through obedience may later find themselves sexually drawn to partners who are emotionally distant or demanding. Each intimate encounter becomes a subconscious attempt to relive the past, only this time hoping for a different outcome. But the ending rarely changes. The pain is recycled, the pattern reinforced, and the illusion of love is mistaken for a chance at redemption. For some, physical intimacy becomes a place where control is finally theirs. If a person grew up feeling powerless, dominated by strict or unpredictable caregivers, they might use sex as a domain where they dictate every move, every boundary, every rule. On the surface, it may appear as empowerment, but beneath it lies a history of disempowerment they've never fully healed from. The body becomes a battlefield for autonomy, and the partner becomes a stand-in for unresolved parental relationships. There's no peace in the act, only performance, strategy, and subtle warfare disguised as passion. Others may fall into the opposite pattern. If love in childhood was conditional, offered only when the child was quiet, compliant, or pleasing, then physical intimacy in adulthood may become a tool of self-worth. They might give themselves too quickly, hoping sex will earn the affection they were once denied. Their boundaries blur, not out of desire but out of desperation. Every encounter becomes a test. Will I be chosen now? Will I be enough this time? But sex cannot fill the hole left by emotional neglect, and so the emptiness returns, deeper and more confusing than before. There are also those who seek chaos in intimacy, not because they enjoy it, but because calmness feels foreign. If a child grew up in a home filled with unpredictability, emotional explosions, silence, sudden shifts in affection, they may unconsciously recreate that turbulence in their adult relationships. When intimacy becomes too stable, they may provoke conflict. When a partner offers safety, they may withdraw or sabotage. The nervous system has been trained to interpret instability as normal. Sex with drama, emotional roller coasters, and power struggles feel more authentic than gentle affection or steady love. Trauma also speaks loudly in the bedroom. Someone who was sexually violated or emotionally manipulated in childhood may dissociate during intimacy, treating the experience as a duty rather than a connection. They may use sex to numb rather than feel, to escape rather than heal. Their body is present, but their spirit is somewhere else, disconnected, distant, and guarded. They may fear closeness, but crave it. They may seek intensity, but run from tenderness. These contradictions are not character flaws. They are survival mechanisms rooted in pain that has yet to be named. Even those who believe they've left the past behind often find its echoes in moments of physical closeness. A sudden emotional shutdown during intimacy, a craving for validation afterward, or a fear of being seen too deeply, all of these are signs that old emotional scripts are still active. Sometimes it's not even the act of sex itself, but what surrounds it. The way a person seeks approval, the way they fear abandonment, or the way they retreat when intimacy becomes emotional rather than physical. Partners often become unknowing participants in this reenactment. One might trigger the other's unresolved fear of abandonment by being emotionally unavailable. Another might echo a parent's controlling behavior through dominance in the relationship. And the tragic part is, both may be unaware that they're playing out old roles on a new stage. Conflict arises not because of incompatibility, but because childhood wounds are colliding in a space meant for mutual care. The bedroom becomes a theater of the past, where each partner unknowingly casts the other in familiar roles. Healing from this pattern requires more than awareness. It demands courage, the courage to sit with discomfort, to question what feels normal, to confront the parts of yourself that have been shaped by pain rather than choice. It requires one to separate past from present, need from desire, fear from love. Intimacy, then, becomes a sacred space not for reenactment, but for transformation. It becomes a chance to write a new script, one not dictated by childhood, but chosen with clarity, self-respect, and truth. Yet many never reach that point. They stay trapped in cycles, convinced that this is what love feels like because it's all they've ever known. They confuse repetition with reality, pain with passion, familiarity with fate. And so they continue, seeking comfort in discomfort, safety in chaos, connection in performance. Until one day, perhaps, they meet someone who doesn't fit the script, someone who invites them to feel safe, to be seen, to be soft. That moment is terrifying and beautiful because it offers the one thing they've never truly experienced: intimacy without reenactment. The desire for power in sex reflects deeper identity and self-worth struggles. Beneath the surface of passion and seduction, this craving for control becomes a mirror, exposing the fragile architecture of one's inner world. For many, sexual power isn't merely about dominance or performance. It's about validation, reassurance, and a desperate attempt to feel valuable in a world that often renders them invisible. When a person feels uncertain about who they are, they seek arenas where they can temporarily feel significant, and sex becomes one of the most potent stages for that illusion. In the heat of the moment, when control is achieved, when the other yields or reacts intensely, it feels like proof: I matter, I am enough, I am desired. But that high is fleeting, and it always fades. This desire is often rooted in early experiences where worth was either denied or inconsistently given. A person who grew up being praised only for their appearance may internalize the belief that physical desirability is their only value. Over time, they begin to equate sexual power with identity. If they can attract, seduce, dominate, or control a partner sexually, it feels like a form of self-definition. But when that attention fades, so does their sense of self. They may cycle through relationships, always looking for new conquests or new confirmations, because underneath the surface, they don't feel whole. The bedroom becomes a battlefield for self-esteem, where victories are momentary and losses feel existential. In some cases, the power-seeking in sex is a rebellion against past helplessness. A person who felt powerless, whether through abuse, neglect, or chronic invalidation, may discover that in sexual contexts they can take control, they can lead, they can make someone else respond to them. This control feels intoxicating, not because of lust, but because of the psychological shift it provides. For once, they are not at the mercy of someone else's choices. For once, they are the one deciding how things unfold. But this need often isn't conscious. It's embedded in the emotional memory of what it felt like to be disregarded or dominated. The power is not enjoyed for itself. It's needed to avoid ever feeling that helpless again. The paradox is that the more someone needs to prove their worth through sexual power, the more they are silently admitting how uncertain they feel about themselves. True self-worth doesn't demand proof. It doesn't require control over others to feel real. But when someone's identity is shaky, they turn to external cues, reactions, moans, obedience, praise, to momentarily fill the void. They believe that if they can dominate a partner, make them desire, submit, or respond intensely, then they've won some unspoken contest. But in reality, they are losing touch with authenticity. The act becomes less about connection and more about confirmation, less about intimacy and more about ego survival. This pattern can also twist into emotional manipulation. When someone believes their value lies in how much power they hold over others, they may use sex as a weapon, denying it, offering it conditionally, or using it to control behaviors. It's no longer an expression of love or attraction, but a tool to manage insecurity. The partner becomes an object in the struggle for self-worth, not a companion in vulnerability. This dynamic creates resentment, distance, and emotional confusion. The more the power is exercised, the less the connection is felt. Eventually, both people suffer, one from the pressure to keep proving their worth, the other from feeling used instead of loved. The desire for power in sex is also linked to gender roles and societal conditioning. Many people are raised with distorted messages about what it means to be masculine or feminine, dominant or submissive, strong or desirable. Men are often taught that sexual conquest equals status, while women may be conditioned to see desirability as their currency. These messages fuel the identity crisis. If a man isn't dominant, is he weak? If a woman isn't desired, is she worthless? These narratives embed themselves deep into the psyche, shaping sexual behavior in ways that feel natural but are actually performances designed to meet external expectations. The bedroom becomes a place to act out these roles, not to explore genuine connection. At its core, the craving for power in sex reveals a deeper question. Who am I without control, without attention, without affirmation? It's a question few dare to ask because the answer often leads to discomfort, grief, and the realization that what they've been chasing is not love, but temporary relief from inner emptiness. Sex becomes a form of self-medication, soothing the ache of not feeling good enough, not being chosen, not being seen. But like any drug, its effects wear off. The temporary sense of power fades, and the original wound resurfaces, deeper and more demanding than before. In the rare moments when this pattern is interrupted, when someone offers unconditional acceptance, when a partner asks for emotional truth instead of performance, the person driven by power may panic. They may reject the intimacy, push it away, or question its authenticity. Real closeness feels unfamiliar. Vulnerability feels threatening. Power gave them a sense of safety. Surrender feels like a risk, but it is in that risk that healing lies. Only when the drive for control is released can real identity begin to emerge, one not built on reactions, validation, or performance, but on presence, truth, and internal stability.